Welcome to the Unfettered Wealth Podcast with Eric Tashlein from Connecticut Capital. In this podcast, we help business owners and successful professionals plan for better wealth outcomes. Join us for this journey where we explore ways to help you identify better wealth decisions to help you achieve an unfettered life. It's time to ask yourself, what do you want more of?
Hello and welcome to Unfettered Wealth with Eric Tashlein. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Eric. How you doing?
Fantastic. It is still wintertime, but I'm nice. I'm inside. I'm warm, so I can't complain.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. We are talking about the Secure Act from what I understand today. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, right before the holidays, Congress passed a bill called the Secure Act, and it's really going to affect everybody in the listening audience. It affects 401ks, IRAs, 529 plans, and there's a lot of info. Most of it overall is good. I think it's going to provide some options and some opportunities for many of the listeners. I think, though, for the folks that have saved a lot of money in qualified plans or IRAs, it's really going to hit them hard in the wallet, and we'll hit on that towards the end.
Okay. All right. So a lot of changes, some good, some bad from what I'm hearing. And again, that's why I'm coming to you, the expert. So where do we start today?
Sure. So I think we'll start on the 401ks because most everybody's in a 401k or a similar qualified plan. So there's some legislation is going to happen this year, some's going to happen next. But for this year, I think the good news is a lot of good options for small business and employees. There's some new income options. There's some tax credits, which everybody that owns a business appreciates.
Yeah, that's nice.
One of the features that's going to be improved upon is auto enrollment. In the past, there was a nominal amount that you'd be signed up for automatically if you hadn't filled out your paperwork. That amount's going to go up, I think around 10%, and even higher in the future. And I think that's a win-win for everybody. From an employer standpoint, it's more people participating if you have testing. And I think from a participant standpoint, hopefully they go into it. I mean, they realize that they're not missing that small amount coming out of their paycheck. So that's a big one. The second one, which is funny, I almost feel like the insurance companies had their hands on this one in a big way. Annuities are really being encouraged within 401ks now. They've been allowed in the past, but not every plan had them. But what's happening now is everybody's realizing that Social Security is not as strong as it could be. People are living a lot longer as well. So I don't think having the annuity is a bad option. The challenge is that picking good annuities is tough, I think, for most fiduciaries. And as part of the law, they've put in a safe harbor provision. So it's kind of a basic checklist. So maybe as a fiduciary, you haven't picked the absolute best annuity, but if you go through this checklist, you'll be safe from that standpoint.
Gotcha.
They just want to make sure that there is an income option. And to dovetail along with that provision, what you're also going to see this year is the 401k statements are going to change. So they're going to start displaying a income projection for most participants. And yeah, I think that's a good thing. I mean, basically, I'm not sure that everybody really takes time to go on to the financial planning software within the 401k to see how they're doing. So every quarter, they'll be reminded that, hey, I'm doing okay, or I really do need to save more.
Got it. Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's any time that we can have more information or more data on how we're doing, I think is a good thing. Now, I want to ask you about the annuity thing, because I know that there's a lot of concern out there about annuities. How were they, when they were included, how are they vetted? Do you know? I mean, who made sure that they're good annuities?
Well, I think that's the challenge, right? And so there's a basic checklist that the government's come up with, and as long as you check on basic financials and basic past history of the company, and you're able to check those boxes, the government basically blesses the annuity within your plan. But I agree with you. I mean, not every annuity is as good as the next one you might look at. And I think there's always been problems with disclosures of fees and some of the intricacies of these. I think the good news is the government recognized that, and there's definitely a lot more liquidity within the annuity and transferability as well. So if you left the employer, you can move the annuity, it looks like, without any major penalties.
Oh, okay.
But, that remains to be seen. It's all new.
All right. What else with 401ks?
Sure. So if you're a employer and maybe you've been holding off on starting a plan, they're going to give you some incentives. So for an example, let's say you started up a new plan and it cost you $5,000 to set up, they're going to give you a 50% credit, in this case, $2,500. The max credit is $5,000. And the kicker is if you have a plan now, or if you start a plan and you offer auto enrollment, they'll give you another $500 credit. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, no kidding.
With the good comes the bad sometimes, especially, it seems like the employers are always, faced with some extra hurdles. So the Secure Act really paved the way for much higher penalties for the employers. So that's just something they need to be aware of. As an employer, you're filing the returns late or the forms are incomplete, the penalties are much, much higher. So you definitely want to make sure you stay on top of your plan.
Yeah, get a professional.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wow.
You want somebody that's going to guide you through like a Sherpa.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then in 2021, there's something called a MEP, multiple employer plan, that's being encouraged. And that just means the pooling of plans with other businesses. Those have been around in the past. They weren't embraced because if there was a bad apple in the pool, they could drag you down with them. And, for example, if Johnny's running a business down the street and he's making late payments in the past, you'd be penalized for Johnny.
Oh, geez.
And so the government put in a kind of a bad apple law that says, if Johnny's not making the payments in time, it won't hurt you. So am I going to run out or are my clients going to run out and join up with 4 or 5 of their friends? I doubt it. It could happen, I guess. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of new association plans being offered with a lot of options. And again, I think what's going to happen is it's great because there's more choice. But I think with more choice, again, you're really going to need somebody to help you decipher which one makes sense or which one doesn't.
Yeah. And again, doing the research, getting a professional in there to help you make that decision, navigate those choices, I think is going to be the key to anybody taking that step forward.
Absolutely. I agree. Some other provisions for 2021. So if you have long-term part-time employees that are over 500 hours, that 2021 will start a new countdown. So if that person's with you for 3 more years, they'll become eligible for the 401k deferrals only. So if you're making safe harbor contributions, those will not be mandated to be made for those employees. But it just kind of opens up, for that individual that maybe has to stay home with the children a few days a week, the opportunity to save. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The one caveat, we have some clients that have some union involvement. This rule doesn't apply to collective bargained employees, just as a heads up.
Oh, okay. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, it just means certain types of employers. I mean, manufacturing firms or construction firms. Sometimes they'll have the ability to work on union jobs, and there's different types of welfare benefit plans there, and it's called collective bargaining in certain cases. And
Gotcha.
This law is not going to affect or impact those plans. And again, that's a whole. I don't want to go into the woods on those plans for sure.
I'm sure it could get deep.
Absolutely.
So what else do we need to cover?
Sure. So big changes on 529s and IRAs, as we said earlier, and some good. So if you're having a baby or if you're adopting, you can now take up to $5,000 out of your IRA or 401k without any penalty. I mean,
all right.
Yeah, which I think is thoughtful. Adoption's very expensive. Having a baby is expensive. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of our clients will run out and use their qualified plan as a piggy bank. I mean, if you have options, you're going to want to work with somebody to understand what's my best choice. But again, I think in this case, I think the government's been thoughtful. They said, hey, listen, if you take out $5,000, there's no penalty. You'll still pay tax unless within 12 months of the birth or the adoption, you pay the money back. Again, I thought that was well thought out.
Gotcha. So, but taking money out of your 401k or IRA probably isn't the best idea anyway, because then you lose that growth potential, right? But if it's your only option, I mean, I understand that there's people out there that can't say I'm going to have a baby, so I've got this extra 5,000 lying around, which would be my case when I had children. So this would have been probably a pretty good option at that point. But man, it's I would hope that people would really think long and hard before they pull money out of their retirement account. because they just lose a lot of growth potential there.
For sure. And, there's definitely a lot of nuances I won't get into. So, with any of these, before you move boldly ahead on something like this, sit down with your advisors, your accountant, in some cases, your attorney, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome. And then, so on 529 plans also, so again, I think this is thoughtful. You can use up to $10,000 in a 529 to pay off student debt. And you can also, if you had an account for Johnny and Johnny had more money than he'd ever need for it, you could pay off $10K of Johnny's debt with it. And then you can look to the other siblings that Johnny might have and pay off another $10K as well. And in the spirit of what you were just saying too, now they're now allowing you to use some 529 money for kindergarten through 12 expense or homeschooling costs. But as you said earlier, does that make sense? Is that really the spirit of why you're in a 529? I mean, most of our clients, when they set up 529s, it's really for long-term growth on a tax favorable basis for those college expenses, which are escalating rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got some friends that they've got 3 boys, and they're looking for all 3 of them to go to a private high school. And I think that they told me it's like $24,000 a year each. And I'm like, oh my Lord. I mean, it's really expensive. So this would be nice if they had that option. Again, it's not college. And so they lose some of those years of growth, but at the same time, having 3 boys that are all about a year apart, that's going to be a hefty bill for a few years for sure.
Yeah, no, better them than us.
Exactly.
Sure. It's tough. So, and so on, I'll get into the IRA front now. So here's some good news, basically. So if you hit we just had a client that came in the door actually yesterday, and she said, I think I'm 70 and a half. I have to take out my distribution this year, right? And we were like, well, now we have some good news. You have another 18 months.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. So she was happy. 'Cause, if you don't need the money, it's great, right? It allows you to defer it longer, hopefully grow it longer. So the old rule was 70 and a half. It's now 72. So an extra 18 months, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Can't hurt. Now, if you are taking RMDs in the past, because you had hit 70 and a half in the past, you still have to stay on that schedule. You can't stop and wait to 72 at this point. So you're kind of grandfathered in on the old schedule.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if you turned 70 and a half in 2019, you had to start RMDs, and you still have to this year, even though you're only 71 and a half-ish, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Bummer.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So some things that you can do, though, to offset. So in the case if somebody's taking their RMDs and they're still working, so a new provision is there's no age cap now in putting back into a tax-deductible IRA account. So, you could be taking out your RMDs and then, making a tax-deductible contribution back into the IRA. So that's neat, especially if you're a 75-year-old and you're still working, for an example. Yeah, so now no age cap for IRAs, and with Roths, there's never been an age cap. So just as a side note.
All right.
And here's so getting into what is really going to impact the large savers here. So in the past, so I'll give you an example. I had a client who passed away, left an account to his son, and that son received call it $100,000. And that son is in his 30s, taking out over his life expectancy. So if the life expectancy is 40, 50 years, he's taking out just a small amount over his lifetime. So it's just fantastic. The stretch IRA was a huge planning technique that we had put in force for so many clients. That, as we know it, is now gone. So if in the case of that client's son who has been receiving that lifetime schedule, that'll continue. But if his father had died this year in 2020 and left it to that son who's 35, there's a compressed schedule now. So that money needs to be paid out over 10 years. You're not forced to take out any amount in the first 9 years. You can wait during that period and take out a lump sum. But the challenge is, as you know, like if you have this large account and it's taxable and you take out a large lump sum, your tax bracket's going to shoot through the roof, right?
Yeah.
So the government wants that money, and that's why they did this. And so it's definitely hurt a lot of people. So I think from a planning standpoint, you're going to start looking at, can I do a Roth IRA? Do I consider a Roth conversion? And the reason being is, so in that same example where dad dies, 35-year-old receives the money and, this year, let's say, in your compressed schedule of 10 years. Well, if it was in a Roth, you could take out a little bit each year, just like you could in the regular IRA. But if you waited to the very end and you allowed it to grow and you took out a lump sum, well, the awesome thing there is you're not going to jump tax brackets because there's no tax on the Roth. So it's really a home run.
So let me ask you this. Is there any tax on the growth from when you receive it? So let's say they get an exact $100,000. They let it grow for that 9.5 years. They take out a lump sum at the end and it's grown to 130. Is there any tax at all on the growth?
Not under current tax law. There's zero, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
It's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are some of the that to me is a big provision. And I think what's going to happen is, and there are some exceptions. So let me speak to those. So if you have an IRA and there's a spousal exception, you can leave it to your spouse and she can take it out over a lifetime. So that's good. There's some other exception as well. So if you have a disabled child, they can still take out over their life expectancy. Somebody who's if it's a chronically ill beneficiary, same. Beneficiary is not more than 10 years younger than the deceased IRA owner. So generally that would be a sibling. They can take out over life expectancy as well. And if there is a special rule, so if you have a child under the age of majority, so let's say that you had an IRA account and the father dies and leaves it to a 10-year-old. Well, that 10-year-old would take out a little bit based on her life expectancy or his up until age of majority, which can be 18 or 21 depending on the state. And then after that, within 10 years, you have to pay it all out. So it's just, they've given a little further benefit to a situation where one of the parents has died, which, again, I think is thoughtful. But again, you want to work with advisors with all this stuff. I just want to make everybody aware that there are some changes and they will impact you for sure.
Let me clarify something. So you said that if a 10-year-old inherits an IRA from the death of a parent, or both parents, let's say, they still have to take out RMDs based on their life expectancy until the age of majority. So from 10 to, let's say, 18 in a lot of states, they have to take out RMDs out of the IRA at that point?
Yeah, small amount. And keep in mind, if somebody's 10, their life expectancy is probably around 70 years. So it's 1/70th. It's just a very small amount. So it keeps that account for the most part intact till the age of majority, and then it's that compressed 10-year schedule that we spoke to.
Yeah, it's a small amount unless it's like a $5 million IRA. Then you get a 10-year-old out there with hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on Pokemon or whatever else is out there.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge planning area. So what's going to happen is now, like we talked about earlier, you may want to look at some Roths. You may want to look at a Roth 401k. It could be oftentimes within the employer plans, you have both options. You might weigh more heavily now in the Roth 401k. As I said earlier, I'm not an attorney, but I think what's going to happen is I think if you are a wealthy business owner, a wealthy individual, an executive, and you have a large IRA and qualified plan, I think you're going to look to other options. And I think sitting down with an advisor for that makes a ton of sense. We have a lot of clients in those situations that, they'll look at charitable remainder trusts, which it will be an option. You can name the charitable remainder trust as an IRA beneficiary, and then you can kind of plan to, over a certain schedule, to pay monies out to beneficiaries, get a little bit of a deduction for the trust, and then at the end, of remainder has to be left to a charity. So if your goal is to maybe stretch money out longer, that will be an option that you'd want to speak to the attorney about. And then also, if in the past, if you've named a trust as an IRA beneficiary, you probably want to go back and sit down with your attorney and say, hey, does this still make sense? Because this new law really has upended some of those for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, I mean, that's a lot to consider. Again, if you're listening to this podcast, please reach out to your professional. If you don't have a professional that's already reached out to you, which they should have, I'll just be honest, they should have already reached out to you in this situation. Make sure that you contact Eric, and we'll give some contact information at the end of the podcast. That's a ton to consider, especially for long-term planning. Wow. All right. What else do we need to cover today?
I think that's it. I think you hit on it. So, just to restate, a lot of 401k changes, all mostly good. I mean, you'll be getting a lot of, I guess the challenge is you're going to see a lot of trees cut down with the amount of communications coming out and all these new laws and provisions. So I think, but for the most part, the challenge I think for most individuals is just the ability to save. And I think if there's more incentive overall, that's good. So it's going to be helpful in the 401k space for sure. I think within the 529 space, there's some more flexibility, which is always good. And lastly, on the IRA space, I think there are some good provisions for the older investor that maybe has not accumulated enough. Mm-hmm. But I think the underlying theme on this whole act is, if you're successful and you had planned on leaving multi-generational legacies, I think this is an area where you're really going to need to sit down, find a good certified financial planner, sit down with your attorney and CPA. And honestly, when you collaborate, I think the end result is much better. And we do that all the time with clients. Let's have a team meeting here, guys. Yes. There's some laws that affect our clients. Let's improve the end result for those individuals. So that's how we work at our office. And that's what we would suggest to everybody that's listening.
100% agree. You guys have to have a team meeting to talk about your uncle, because Uncle Sam he wants that money early. I think that's the bottom line. Is like, there's quite a bit of money out there, and do I want to wait, for 60 to 70 years over somebody else's lifespan? Nah. Let's just take it within the next 10 and get all my tax money. Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me, right? I've heard before, and I'm not going to quote the person who originally said it. It was probably decades ago, but tax law is written in pencil, right? They like erasers. They like to change things, and this new change is big deal, and it's time to sit down with an advisor. So, Eric, how do people reach out if they want to go ahead and reach out to you and say, hey, look, I need to sit down and have a team meeting?
Sure. I'd say probably the best way is just through our website. It's ConnecticutCapital.com. Certainly go old school and call us at 203-877-1520 as well. But, happy to field any calls with questions.
Perfect. All right, Eric, until next time, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric.
You bet. And thank you all for listening to the Unfettered Wealth Podcast with Eric Tashlein. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Eric comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And I'll be honest, share it with your advisor too, because if this is news to them, call Eric. It shouldn't be news to them. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Connecticut Capital Management Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Unfettered Wealth Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Connecticut Capital. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. Content should not be construed as personalized investment, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your advisor, attorney, or tax advisor in regards to your individual situation. Eric Tashlein is an investment advisory representative of Connecticut Capital Management Group, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Connecticut Capital Management Group, LLC, and Connecticut Benefits Group, LLC are not affiliated.
Eric Tashlein is a certified financial planner professional and founding principal of Connecticut Capital Management Group, LLC, 2 Schooner Lane, Suites 1-12 in Milford. He can be reached at 203-877-1520 or through www.connecticutcapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice or legal tax advice. Please consult your advisor, attorney, tax advisor. Eric is an investment advisor representative of Connecticut Capital Management Group, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Connecticut Capital Management Group, LLC, and Connecticut Benefit Group, LLC are not affiliated.